Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition in the Jehovah's Witness series. In this episode, we'll be discussing politics. If you go to the Jehovah's Witness website, jw.org, and type into the search bar politics, you will see numerous articles that come up. Why did Jehovah's Witness maintain political neutrality? Let's click that. Why did Jehovah's Witness maintain political neutrality? Well, they say, we do not lobby, vote, political candidates run by the government or office, or participate in any action to change governments. We believe the Bible gives solid reasons for the following course. So they give these biblical reasons, 4 points. First point says, we follow the example of Jesus, who refused to accept political office. Okay. Do the Jehovah's Witness really think that their followers are so stupid? Yes, Jesus refused to accept political office when they tried to make him their king. But Jesus refused to do a lot of things. He refused to baptize John the Baptist. Does that mean, therefore, you should not baptize your cousin because Jesus refused to baptize his cousin? Jesus didn't get married or have children. There's a lot of things that Jesus didn't do. Should you say, therefore, we shouldn't do them? I don't think that premise lends support to the conclusion that you shouldn't vote because Jesus refused to be the king. Now, he taught his disciples to be not part of this world. Okay? Well, what does voting have to do with not being part of this world? Who's concluding that not being part of this world means you should not vote? Well, why doesn't not being part of this world mean that you shouldn't tie your shoes in the morning? Or you shouldn't eat Frosted Flakes because you don't want to be part of this world? Who's concluding not to be part of this world entails not to vote? Point number 2 says, we are loyal to God's kingdom, which Jesus spoke when he said, the good news of the kingdom will be preached in all the inhabited earth. Okay, well, this here assumes that in order to be loyal to God's kingdom, you cannot vote. Because Jesus said the kingdom will be preached throughout the world, therefore you can't vote. How does that follow? It goes on to say, as representatives of God's kingdom, commissioned to proclaim its coming, we remain neutral in the political affairs of all countries, including the ones we live. Okay, so how is preaching the good news of God's kingdom, you must do that, therefore you shouldn't vote? I don't see that leads support to the conclusion. Just because Jesus said that God's kingdom will be preached throughout the world doesn't mean you should conclude that you shouldn't vote. And there are other biblical arguments that we will provide later on after we go through these. But the third point, by remaining neutral, we are able to speak freely to people of all political persuasions about the good news of God's kingdom. Okay, so here in this point, they say by remaining neutral, we are able to speak freely to people of all political persuasions. And this assumes that if you're not neutral, you're not able to speak freely. But the Jehovah's Witness followers cannot, they must think that you guys are stupid. Somebody can just argue the opposite and say that by being neutral, you're not able to speak freely, because somebody in a political spectrum or likes to talk about politics, you're ignorant of the subject, therefore you can't talk about it. You don't have a common interest in the discussion. Therefore, you can't talk about, why you chose this or who you chose that and how does this relate to God's kingdom. You just have to say, well, I can't talk about that. I'm neutral. And you're not able to speak freely to people of all political persuasions. Then they go on to say, we try to show by our words and practices that we rely on God's kingdom. Okay, well, relying on God's kingdom, does that say that you need to be neutral? No, being neutral does not rely on God's kingdom. If anything, it undermines God's kingdom, because God says you're supposed to be involved in politics. He says to obey your government and your authorities, and your government authorities ask you to vote, but you refuse to do that. The government, God says to pray for those who are in authority, and that's getting involved. When you pray for somebody, that's physically and spiritually involved in what you're praying for. But you refuse to do that, not relying on God's kingdom, not relying on God's way, but relying on your own way. Okay, the last and final point that they do says we avoid political divisions. We are united as an international brotherhood. Okay, here it looks like they're assuming in order to be united as a brotherhood, you cannot be divided politically. Well, says who? I mean, in order to be united in a brotherhood, you can't be divided? What if you're divided on a Ford or Chevy? Or Nike shoes versus Reebok? I mean, this is a division here on brands and things like that. I mean, you have to be united in every single thing. And if you're not united in every single thing, how come you cannot be divided in politics if you're divided in your brand of vehicle you drive, etc.? I know your time is valuable, so try to make this as quick as possible, but here are 2 reasons to get involved in politics. One is God commands you to, and the other is your government commands you to, and God commands you to obey your government. So the first one here, several places in the Bible where God says, at least here in 1 Timothy 2:1, says supplication and prayers for all those who are in positions, high positions, and for kings. So God says to pray for kings. Now, does praying actually mean you're getting involved? Well, Elijah prayed for rain 7 times, and God granted the rain. So if you pray for something, God may grant it. And if you pray for the politicians and God grants it to the politicians, that certainly seems to me like you're getting involved in politics. So if you want to obey prayers and supplications for kings and those in authority, as God says, then you got to get involved. See, Jesus said, ask and it will be given to you. Your Father who is in heaven, give good things to those who ask him. So God's telling you to get involved in politics when he tells you to pray for the kings and those in high positions. Now, what about physically involved when it has to do with praying? Have you heard of the butterfly effect? It says that the flapping of butterfly wings can cause hurricanes weeks later. Just a small cause of a butterfly wing can have great effects. It's called the butterfly effect. Take a look on Wikipedia. But how much more effect can thousands of God's people praying for politicians have? I mean, say you're going to go to Walgreens, get some ice cream, but you choose to stop and obey God and to pray for those who are in authority. How much drastic effects that's going to have on you and the people in the world around you by making those changes. So definitely having physical effects. So praying for politicians is getting physically involved as well. Okay, here's the other one. God says to obey the government in several places throughout Scripture, especially here in Romans 13, subject to governing authorities. Barack Obama says go vote. Did you go and vote? Well, God says you're supposed to obey the government because those who ever resist authorities resist what God has appointed. And the government tells you to go out and vote. Well, thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoy. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments below.